Dear students, today we are going to get an idea about gender relations in early medieval India. What we read history. Have we ever thought to know the story of the women or her story? Why always history is his story? Here I would like to begin with what E.H. Carr stated once upon a time in his book What is History? For him, history means experiences. And the experiences, what we are talking for, are not the experiences of the males of the society or of the civilizations. The women who are always the guiding force behind any kind of transformation, revolution, and also upsurge. They should be taken into account. I would like to say, without knowing her story, his story never completes. So, we need to have a balance in history, in historical discourses. If we talk on the contributions of women in early medieval period in India, we need to understand the continuity. What I am trying to say, the continuity means the position of women in ancient India, whether we are trying to locate or identify any change in the early medieval period, or if it's so, then how can we understand that analysis or that comparison? If I would start with what Kumkum Roy she wanted to say, according to her, it was the history of the patriarchal society. The Brahmins or the people from the high caste and class, they wrote the stories of the time. There we didn't find the presence of women who were also taking an important role for shaping up the society, but they were the silent spectators. But their contributions were always there, not being recognized by the society. Definitely, if we go for the literary texts, then it's difficult for us to find out what the women in the early medieval period in our country contributed for the development of the civilization as well as of the society. No, we didn't get much references. But here we can rely on the inscriptions. From the inscriptions or from the study of epigraphy, we get a lot of examples where we can prove that in early medieval period, women, they established themselves as able administrators. They excelled in the field of art and literature. They also excelled in the field of administration and took part, like their male counterparts, equally for the development of the thoughts and ideas of that time. So, I would like to explore that history of women in early medieval period by giving special emphasis on their education, their religious life, their contributions for the growth of administration, and also the women queens or the queens of that time who shaped up the political ideology with some new insights which perhaps are not being that much highlighted. And it's a time for us to see how these women, they played an important role behind the growth of Indian civilization, especially of Indian political ideas of that time. According to the literary sources, whatever information we are getting, there we have seen the main focus is on the patriarchal society. The Brahmins or the upper caste and class people, they were writing their own stories. where women, they were having very insignificant place. And it was also being supported by Kumkum Roy that women were never being considered as a prime focus for the writings of ancient as well as of early medieval literature. I would also like to say that here inscriptions or through the study of epigraphy, we have come to know about the various aspects through which we could intervene in gender history to know the contributions of women and also their position. According to the Smriti writers, there was always a preference to have male child in our Indian society. It was not only in the case of ancient India, but in the early medieval period also. The couple or the husband and wife after their marriage, when they want to have a child, they always prefer to have a male child. This situation is definitely telling us the life of the women of that time, and that was definitely miserable, I must say. Even the wish for having male child is also being documented in the inscriptions. I would like to mention one of the inscriptions here, that is Govindpur stone inscription of circa 1137 AD, where we have seen this kind of wish has been recorded. In this 21st century, we hardly think about the feasibility of child marriage. Yes, it's illegal. But we are talking about a time when child marriage was the norm of the society. Historians who worked on the basis of literary sources of the early medieval period held that the early age of marriage lowered the education avenues for a girl child. That means to get education was practically impossible when the society was compelling a girl to get married at an early age. Here we find a striking difference with the ancient period, especially if I talk on the position of women in the Rig Vedic period. As you know, that time higher education was permitted to the girls, and they also had Upanayana or sacred thread ceremony. But the situation started changing from the later Vedic period, and in the early medieval period, we can witness the crisis became more acute. Brahmanical Shastras offer little advice on the formal education of the daughter. That means female education was not allowed or was not recognized in the society. Definitely, the women from the higher caste and class perhaps were allowed to learn, but what about the women from the society as a whole? We have no clue or no idea. It was a time when we can say for a girl, the only training in her maiden days was gaining expertise in domestic works, which she was to perform during the greater part of her life as a wife and a mother. education she used to get? No formal education, but the education which would help her to become an ideal wife as well as an ideal mother. This is the situation or position of women in early medieval period, that they were being deprived of enlightenment or enlightening themselves. Rather, they were homebound women who were like the caged birds. She was not considered fit for any Vedic education and the Upanayana ceremony. The Manu Samhita lays down that the difference of age between the bride and the bridegroom should ideally be 3 times. Bridegroom being 30 or 21 of age, the bride should then be 10 or 7 years old. Can you imagine, dear students, this kind of huge difference was being considered as legal and socially accepted, where both the husband and wife had no space for communication or interaction, rather blindly just to follow their conjugal life. So this is something like a torture or something like a deprivation of having a normal life, and which was a kind of punishment for the women of early medieval India. So the position of women in early medieval period seems to be like the caged birds who wanted to break the chain of dependence and would like to be free. So here we find some scattered references through which we could prove that all the her stories are not the same. In the Maruthur plates of Satya Sri Prithivallava, second Pulakeshi from Andhra Pradesh of the 7th century, we get the reference of a queen whose name was Kadamba Mahadevi, and she was praised for her political wisdom, humbleness, and good conduct. She also did charity for the welfare of people. So, it was a story of a woman who was empowered, she was politically enlightened, she did charity, and she was humble. But she was a queen or belonged from the upper class society. We have less idea about the position of women as a whole in the early medieval period. The inscriptions, which are the basic source for us to understand the status of women, there we find mostly the mention of the higher class women who also belonged from higher caste. They were empowered, they were educated, sometimes they were military skillful, they used to held the positions like Nayakas or Samantas, that means higher administrative position, they were queens. Apart from that, they were the examples for us that made our understanding better and transparent, and it also helps us to know the layers of the society where we can identify the pulse of the people, especially how the women got treated at that time. So, here we can definitely apply the subaltern approach to understand the her story, because whatever the references we are getting, all those references are emphasizing on position of women in the higher class society. Those were the royal women. But if we would like to explore history from below, then unfortunately, dear students, we don't have much references to mention. Therefore, there is a gap in the gender history or the history of women in early medieval period, where we are praising the women who had wealth and definitely who were enlightened, and they got the support of the male members of their families. But the ordinary women, the women at the mass level, were not being the subjects for any kind of historical reference. It might be a literary source, it might be an inscription, or anywhere we do not find the story of the marginalized or the women from the ordinary class. So, we need to bridge this gap, and also we need to explore the avenues in future so that we would be able to know about the women who were marginalized and how they used to live in early medieval period. I was talking about the position of women in early medieval period, and the references which we have got, where we have mainly seen that the horror stories of the royal women, and most of these women, they belonged from Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, that means from South India, and also we get references of empowered women from the places like Kashmir, Kannauj, and Himachal. We have heard the name of Didda. Who was she? She was the Queen of Kashmir. So it was a time where we find that many queens, they ruled all over India. But unfortunately, in our mainstream history, we hardly get their references. Also, I can mention about the Bhuma queens of Orissa, where we find 6 queens from the same dynasty they ruled, and they also had an impact on the minds of people. How they tried to change the political scenario of that particular place by showing their dominance and authority. Women who were empowered, who were definitely marginalized. Why I am saying so? Because they were confined to a particular section of the society. If we talk on the religious life of the women of early medieval period, then we have seen women, they actively participated in the religious activities, and those activities were not only related to the Brahmanical religion. Women were also being instrumental to spread the religions like Buddhism and Jainism. And we have seen here how the royal women, they patronized the growth and development of these Protestant religions. We have seen many queens, they gave land grants to the religious institutions so that they would flourish. This is giving us a different impression about the position of women. They were not only skillful, or not only they were good in music, dance, or in the various aspects of art and aesthetics. Women, they used to have financial power also. The queens or the royals, I'm talking about the wives of the kings, they used to have their own property. I would like to mention about the property rights of women of that time. We find various references, and according to those references, we find a lot of different opinions. Some of the literary texts in early medieval period, they supported the cause of the widows to have rights over the property of her dead husband. But in the ancient period, not always this kind of attitude was there. And it is also important to understand the concept of Stri Dhan. That means women, they were also entitled or they were allowed to have their own property. Even a daughter, if there is no son in the family, is also eligible or was also eligible to inherit the property of her mother. So the concept with regard to property rights started getting a favorable transformation in the early medieval period if we make a comparison with ancient India. But on the other hand, it is also noticeable that how the age for marriage for a girl had been lowered down in this particular time. So on the one hand, we were trying to curtail the wings of a girl so that she wouldn't be able to expand her freedom. On the other hand, she was getting the right over the property. It is creating some kind of a dichotomy or a contrast which we need to explore more. As per the inscriptions, what we are referring, it is important for us to say that land grants by the women were very common at that time. Mostly they used to give land grants, as I have already mentioned, to the religious institutions. Some secular land grants also we have noticed. So it was a time when we can see a comparison can come out from this discussion where on the one hand we are seeing women who were royals having financial independence, they were academically enriched, and also they were ruling in some parts of the Indian subcontinent. But on the other hand, if we would like to know about the women as a whole or about her story as a whole, then we do not have any idea about the marginalized women or the women who belonged from the ordinary class. So this kind of disparity is something which always comes into my mind, and that is also showing the limitation of our historiography. In my discussion, I have touched the aspects of women's education, their family life, giving emphasis on their age for marriage, how the society, the patriarchal society, always wished for having a male child. That is something detrimental for the growth and development of the idea of having gender neutrality at that time, and it was something like an utopian dream. Still, we are raising our voice for gender neutrality, but still it's a dream. But definitely we have come forward and trying to bridge the gap and trying to have a world for all. Second thing which I have discussed in my lecture, that the financial independence of royal women, how they used to give land grants to the religious institutions as well as to the people, individual people as well. I also tried to highlight on the fact that we are trying to talk on women of certain places like of South India, the women from Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and the other places, and women from North India like from Kashmir, Himachal and Kannauj. What about the women of the other parts of India? Unfortunately, we don't know much of the women of Bengal and East India or the other parts where we do not find any inscription that much indicating the position of women. Also, I would like to say that women, they became war prisoners many a times, not only in ancient India, also during the medieval period or early medieval period. We get the references of women slaves, and definitely they were not being treated with respect, as we all know that slavery is always a job which is very much disrespectful. So, these are the avenues which we need to explore more so that we can get a more transparent picture or impression of women in early medieval period, and the lack of resources is definitely a problem for us to pursue the research, and that is something challenging for the historians who are working on gender or the women's history as well. I would like to conclude by saying that this is something which would make our students enlightened and interested to make a comparison between the position of women in ancient and early medieval India, so that they could further research on the position of women in medieval and also in the colonial times to get an idea about gender historiography to a great extent, or to get an idea about the history of women with a lot of variations and transformations which took place through the course of history.